The wind that night carried no sand, no scent, no sound. It moved like breath between worlds, soft, deliberate, alive. Idris, a scholar of forgotten verses, sat alone upon a dune of blackened earth, his ink-stained fingers tracing the faint lines of a parchment that spoke of stars and divine order. For years he had studied the patterns of the heavens, believing that the sky too was a scripture, each constellation a letter in the endless book of Allah's design. But that night, the stars did not follow their paths. At first, he thought his weary eyes deceived him. Yet as the silence deepened, the constellations above him began to tremble, their light dimming and flaring in perfect rhythm, as if a pulse ran through the firmament. Then came the sound. It was not thunder, nor wind, nor any voice he had ever known. It was a whisper vast enough to shake his bones, soft enough to feel like mercy. The desert seemed to listen with him, every grain of sand holding its breath. Idris rose, heart pounding. The parchment slipped from his hand and was carried away by a current that had no direction. His lantern flickered though there was no wind, its flame stretching upward as though reaching for something unseen. Then the horizon fractured. A thin, white crack of light appeared across the night sky, widening until it burned like dawn. The stars bent toward it, bowing, vanishing one by one. Idris fell to his knees, shielding his eyes, yet unable to look away. The air thickened. A scent like rain upon ancient stone filled the valley. His ears rang with the echo of 1,000 wings, though he saw nothing but brightness. For a heartbeat, the earth itself seemed to hum, a vibration not of sound, but of certainty, as if creation remembered its origin. Idris whispered a prayer, the words trembling. "My Lord, if this is a sign, make me steadfast." But the light only grew stronger, blurring the line between heaven and earth. Then it stopped. The crack sealed, the stars stilled, and the world fell into a silence so deep it felt like absence. Only the afterglow remained, a faint shimmer upon the sands, as though the desert had been brushed by something not meant for mortal sight. Idris sat frozen, his pulse echoing in the vast stillness. The whisper lingered in his mind, a single line without language, echoing between his thoughts. He knew this was no dream, no mirage born of solitude. Something had crossed the veil. From the corner of his eye he saw it, a faint radiance half buried in the sand, pulsing like a heartbeat. He approached slowly, each step deliberate, reverent. There, resting as though placed by unseen hands, lay what appeared to be a feather, yet not of any creature known to man. It shimmered with pale fire, both warm and cold, shifting colors like dawn and dusk intertwined. When he reached for it, the light receded, dimming to the hue of moonlit glass. He hesitated, his breath shallow. The words of the Quran echoed in his heart. "And none knows the soldiers of your Lord except him." He withdrew his hand, afraid his touch might profane what was sacred. The feather pulsed once more, brighter, and a whisper rippled through the sands, faint, rhythmic, almost like the recitation of verses in the wind. Idris turned toward the dark horizon, expecting to see someone, anyone, but the desert stretched infinite and empty. Only the moon, pale and trembling, watched him from above. The scholar fell into prostration, his forehead pressing against the earth. He did not ask for answers. He asked for forgiveness, for the fear that trembled in his faith. When he rose again, the feather was gone, leaving only a faint glow in the sand that slowly faded into nothing. Yet his palm still burned with unseen cold, and in his heart lingered a certainty he could not name. As dawn began to edge across the desert, Idris gathered his parchment and looked once more to the heavens. The stars now rested in perfect stillness, as though nothing had ever happened. But he knew the sky had whispered that night, and what descends once may descend again, and Allah knows best. The dawn after the sky whispered was not like other dawns. The horizon glowed with a strange pallor, as if the sun itself hesitated to rise. Idris walked through the village before the call to prayer, his cloak heavy with the scent of sand and sleeplessness. The people stirred restlessly. Mothers clutched their children. Shepherds stared eastward, and even the old wells seemed to echo faintly. their waters shimmering with a reflection that did not belong to this world. Whispers traveled faster than the morning wind. Some said the heavens had cracked open. Others swore a pillar of light had touched the earth and left the ground singing. Idris listened, but said nothing. He followed the direction of the stories, east, toward the place where the radiance was last seen. The journey was long, the air dry and thick with a metallic taste. Along the way, he found marks in the sand, not footprints, not the traces of any beast, but smooth impressions as if the ground had been pressed by waves of light. The heat of the rising sun could not erase them. He knelt beside one and touched the edges. They were cold, smooth like glass. The memory of the feather burned faintly in his palm again, a reminder that he was walking a path no mortal had charted. By midday he reached a valley scorched beyond recognition. The dunes had melted into a field of dark, glassy shards. The air trembled above it, distorting the sky into ripples of light. Idris covered his face and stepped forward cautiously. Each shard reflected fragments of himself. His eyes multiplied, his form scattered across the mirrored sand like 1,000 witnesses to his fear. The silence was unbearable, broken only by the faint crackle of heat escaping from the earth. Then, among the reflections, he saw something that did not belong. The silhouette of a man standing at a distance, motionless, haloed in light. He called out, his voice swallowed by the shimmering air. The figure did not move. Idris blinked, and the image fractured. One moment there, the next gone, leaving only a faint shimmer in its place. His heart pounded as he pressed onward, uncertain whether he was being led or tested. The ground beneath him seemed to pulse with memory, and he realized that even the glass carried traces of what had transpired. Embedded within it were outlines of hands, faces turned upward, and the faint impression of feathers too vast to belong to any creature of earth. As he walked deeper, he saw the sand darken, until at its center lay a perfect circle of ash. The edges were still warm. Around it, faint markings spiraled outward, forming patterns too deliberate to be nature's doing. Idris knelt, brushing his fingers across the surface, and felt the hum of something alive beneath it. Not movement, but remembrance. He closed his eyes and recited quietly from the Quran, the verses of protection and awe. The air responded, a brief stirring like breath upon his face. When he opened his eyes, a gust of wind swept through the valley, sudden and fierce, lifting clouds of black dust into the air. The particles shimmered as they rose, catching the sunlight in hues of gold and silver, as if the remnants of something holy refused to settle. The villagers who had followed from afar fell to their knees, shielding their faces. Some wept, others fled. Idris stood amidst the storm of dust, his robe flapping violently, his heart trembling between fear and reverence. It was then that he saw what the others could not. Among the swirling particles moved faint shapes. Wings vast and slow, gliding soundlessly through the storm before dissolving into air. He dropped to the ground, his forehead pressed against the cooling glass. The dust settled, leaving the valley hushed once more. Behind him, the people whispered prayers, their voices shaking. Idris turned to them, his face pale but resolute. "Do not speak of what you do not understand," he said softly, though his own understanding was threadbare and trembling. One of the elders stepped forward, holding a handful of dust that glittered like crushed stars. "Then tell us, scholar," the man said, "is this mercy or warning?" Idris looked to the horizon. The east was glowing faintly again, as if the heavens prepared to open once more. He felt the weight of the question settle in his chest, heavy as prophecy. "I do not know," he whispered, "but the sky remembers us." His words faded into the wind, and somewhere far beyond sight, a low sound echoed, a hum that resonated like a heartbeat through the earth. He gathered a shard of the glassy sand into his satchel, its surface still warm beneath his fingers. Whatever had descended had not come to destroy, not yet. It had come to witness, to leave a trace of remembrance in the dust. As he turned back toward the village, the faint glow at the horizon deepened, the same color as the feather that had burned cold in his hand. Something waited beyond the dunes, and Idris knew the path was only beginning. And Allah knows best. The days that followed were veiled in stillness, as if the world itself held its breath. Idris remained near the edge of the scorched valley, unable to abandon what he had witnessed. The shard of glass he had taken now pulsed faintly each night, glowing from within like an ember beneath frost. The villagers, fearful yet drawn to him, kept their distance. They whispered that the scholar had touched something forbidden, that he walked now between the seen and unseen. Idris did not deny them, for in truth, he felt neither wholly of this world nor apart from it. One evening, when the sun had sunk into blood-red haze and the first stars began to shimmer, Idris sat beneath a twisted acacia and drew the shard from his satchel. Its glow had grown stronger. As he turned it in his hand, he saw it reflected not the sky, but something beneath it. A shifting light that pulsed with silent rhythm. The faint impression of the feather he had once found began to form again within the glass, lines of brilliance tracing themselves from memory. Then, as the last light of dusk faded, a sudden chill crept through his fingers. The shard trembled, cracked softly, and from within it emerged a faint glimmer. The same feather, unburned, whole once more. It rested weightless upon his palm, yet its touch sent a shiver deep into his bones. The glow was neither warm nor cold, but something beyond such opposites. Idris felt his breath catch. Slowly, he raised the feather to his eye, and in its sheen he saw fleeting visions. Mountains trembling beneath clouds of gold, oceans reflecting faces made of light, and cities of dust kneeling beneath unseen wings. The images faded as quickly as they came, leaving him in silence. He pressed the feather to his heart and whispered remembrance, but no sound left his lips. That night, the air around him shifted. The desert wind no longer carried sand, but fine, pale dust that shimmered faintly, as though the heavens were shedding unseen tears. Idris rose and followed the direction from which the wind came, toward the far ridge that bordered the valley. His steps grew heavier with each breath, as though he walked against an invisible current. When he reached the crest, the world below him shimmered with strange light. The valley was no longer scorched. It glowed softly, covered in a thin frost-like layer that sparkled beneath the moon. And there, at the center of that quiet luminescence, something stirred. He descended slowly, heart steady, yet trembling within. The feather in his hand pulsed faintly, its glow synchronizing with something deep within the earth. As Idris drew closer, the ground beneath his feet began to hum, a soundless vibration that resonated through his bones. He knelt beside a hollow in the ground, where the frost seemed to flow like liquid silver, and dipped his fingers into it. The cold pierced him instantly. His breath froze in his chest, and his vision blurred with tears. When he pulled his hand back, the feather had darkened, its glow now faint and deep blue, like a buried flame. Then he heard it. A voice, not from outside, but within his very thoughts. It was neither male nor female, neither loud nor soft. It was presence itself speaking in a silence that filled him. Not all light brings comfort. The words burned through him, and with them came understanding. Not of meaning, but of purpose. The feather was not a relic of beauty, but a sign of reckoning. It had descended not as ornament, but as witness. The ground trembled faintly, and Idris fell backward, gasping. The frost receded, and the valley dimmed once more to shadow. The feather in his hand had turned entirely cold, the glow gone. Only its shape remained, faintly etched in frost against his skin. He looked toward the heavens, but the stars offered no answer, their stillness sharper than before. Idris returned to the village before dawn, his steps unsteady, his thoughts heavy as the silence between prayers. The people awaited him in fear and hope, eyes reflecting the faint light of his burden. One of them asked, "What did you find in the valley, scholar?" Idris opened his hand, showing the darkened feather that no longer shone. "Light," he said softly, "that teaches by cold." They did not understand, and he did not explain. That night, as he lay in restless half-sleep, the wind carried faint whispers, not words, but a rhythm he recognized, the same pulse he had heard within the feather. Somewhere far away, something vast had begun to stir again. The air itself felt like breath drawn before revelation. Idris rose, lit his lamp, and looked east. The horizon was faintly aglow once more, pale as dawn yet hours before morning. He knew then that whatever had touched the earth had not departed. It had only begun to awaken, and Allah knows best. The faint glow that had haunted the horizon for nights no longer wavered. It pulsed, rhythmic and steady, like the beat of a living heart beneath the sky. Idris watched it from the edge of the village, his mind torn between fear and yearning. Each night it grew brighter, and each morning the people spoke of strange dreams, of stars falling into the sea, of wings that blotted the moon, of voices reciting verses they could not recall upon waking. Idris knew the signs were mounting. The cold feather that once gleamed with divine light had begun to hum again, faintly, whenever he faced the east. It was no longer a relic but a compass, leading him toward something, or someone. Before dawn, he set out alone, guided by the faint rhythm of that hidden pulse. His path led him beyond the glassy valley into lands of forgotten stone, where ruins of an older world slept half-buried in dust. The wind there carried whispers of ancient tongues and the scent of metal long corroded. As he walked, he remembered a story once told by an elder, of a hermit who studied the stars from the high cliffs of Al-Hajjah, a man who had traced the heavens so precisely that even the Bedouins called him the one who reads the sky. Idris felt the pull of that legend now, as though destiny itself was unfolding its map before him. The journey took 3 nights. By the third, the moon was hidden behind clouds, and the stars flickered weakly, as though veiled. Idris found the man not in a tower of stone or a chamber of instruments, but in a hollow cave lit by the faint fire of oil and reflection. The hermit was old, his beard white as salt, his eyes sharp and unblinking. Around him the walls were carved with circles and lines, maps of the heavens drawn with trembling devotion. When Idris entered, the old man did not turn. He only spoke, his voice like the rustle of pages in an endless book. "You've come because the heavens have shifted again." Idris hesitated. "Then you've seen it too?" The man nodded slowly. "I saw it before the first night ended. The stars bent, but not toward the sun. They moved as they did once in the age of ascent, when the veil was thin and the messengers crossed freely between worlds." His gaze drifted toward the mouth of the cave, where the wind whispered through cracks like the faint recitation of prayer. "But this descent bears a shadow. The symmetry is broken. What was once aligned with mercy now trembles with warning." The scholar approached, his heart tightening. "You speak of descent, but of whom?" "The angels do not err." The hermit's eyes gleamed, pale and knowing. "They do not, but men who witness them err in understanding." He traced one trembling finger across a star map. "Look here. The stars have formed the same pattern seen on the night the prophet ascended in light. Yet there is one difference, a single star missing from its station. And when a place once filled by light grows empty, what follows is confusion." Idris studied the map. The lines formed a vast arc, a gate drawn through constellations, a pattern that pulsed with order. But at its heart was a void, a dark gap where no star glimmered. "And if that gap is filled?" he asked softly. The hermit shook his head. "Then the earth will tremble with knowing. The unseen will no longer whisper, it will speak." A deep silence filled the cave. The oil flame flickered once, and the light bent unnaturally, stretching into a thin column that pointed eastward. Idris felt the feather in his satchel grow cold again, as though in recognition. The hermit's gaze followed the glow, his voice breaking into a whisper. "It has begun already. The descent was not one, but many. You are not the only witness, scholar. The valleys of the south have burned with signs. The rivers glow by night, and in the north a sound like wings has been heard where no birds fly." Idris bowed his head. "Then what is required of us?" The old man's reply was weary, filled with reverence and sorrow. "Patience. For what descends now is not to be stopped by men of earth. It is not a storm to be fled, but a decree to be understood. Yet mark my words, one among the watchers will falter, and his faltering will decide the balance." The cave fell silent again. Idris felt the wind shift, carrying with it a faint resonance, the same rhythm that had haunted his dreams. The old man's eyes unfocused, staring beyond sight. "Do you hear it?" he asked quietly. The sound beneath sound? That is the breath of the heavens when they move against their own stillness. Idris listened, and indeed there was something. A faint hum that rose from the stones themselves, deep and mournful. It seemed to echo from the earth and the stars alike. The scholar stepped back, his chest heavy with awe and dread. He knew now that his journey was no longer about understanding what had descended, but enduring what it would unveil. He turned to leave, but the hermit's voice halted him once more. When the sky opens again, the old man said, remember what the stars forgot. Idris looked back, but the hermit's form had already faded into shadow, as if consumed by the very patterns he had drawn. The scholar stepped into the night, the cold wind pressing against his face, and saw that the horizon now glowed brighter than ever, its light no longer trembling, but steady, vast, and near, and Allah knows best. The horizon that had glowed faintly for nights now blazed with steady brilliance, a pale flame that swallowed the stars. Idris stood beneath it, his cloak drawn tight against the cold wind that swept from the east. The words of the hermit still echoed in his mind. When the sky opens again, remember what the stars forgot. He did not yet understand. But the feather within his satchel had begun to thrum with a quiet resonance, a pulse that matched his own heartbeat. It called him toward the valley once more, to the place where the earth itself had turned to glass. He reached the valley at dawn. The rising sun broke across the horizon like molten silver, spilling its light into the field of glass. It shimmered as if alive, the mirrored dunes reflecting an image of the heavens so perfectly that Idris felt caught between two skies, one above, one below, both endless. Each step he took echoed faintly, the glass beneath him humming with a tone that seemed almost melodic. It was no longer the scorched wasteland he had first entered. Now it was a vast mirror of creation, untouched by dust, as if the world had been remade in light. He paused at the center, where the ground curved inward like the basin of a great bowl. There, within the smooth surface, a shape waited, a vast imprint pressed deep into the glass. Faint yet unmistakable. Wings, not carved nor burned, but fused into the very substance of the valley. Their span so wide they seemed to embrace the horizon. Idris fell to his knees before them. The sight struck through him like remembrance, something beyond reason yet painfully familiar, as though his soul had known this form long before his eyes had seen it. He reached out and placed his hand upon the wing's edge. The glass was cold, but beneath that coldness, something stirred, a slow vibration that rose through his bones. The valley began to hum again, louder this time, resonant and low. Idris drew back, his breath catching as light rippled across the wings, tracing their form in lines of gold and white. A single word, not spoken, but felt, filled his mind. Witness. He turned, searching for movement, and saw within the reflection of the glass his own figure multiplied, tenfold, 100-fold, each version of himself kneeling at different moments of faith and fear. The images were not illusions. They were memories of his belief, mirrored through time. Idris stared in awe, realizing that the valley was more than a place of descent. It was a record, etched not by human hands, but by the presence of the unseen. Then, from the far edge of the basin, a sound rose like the striking of distant thunder. A fissure split the glass, spreading outward in a web of light. The crack glowed, and a faint shape began to form within its heart, tall, radiant, faceless. The air thickened until Idris could barely breathe. His heart pounded as he took a hesitant step forward. The shape lifted an arm, not in threat but in command. Idris fell to his knees, overcome by a weight not of fear, but of recognition. No voice spoke, yet the message was clear, pressing upon his soul like gravity. What descends must be remembered. What is remembered must be fulfilled. Idris lowered his head, his palms flat against the glass. The light flared, and for a moment the valley vanished. There was only whiteness, limitless, formless, alive. He felt as though his body were dissolving into its brilliance, his thoughts stripped of language. In that instant, he understood nothing yet believed completely. Then, as suddenly as it came, the light withdrew. The valley returned, silent and still. The wing shapes faded into translucence, leaving only faint impressions like breath upon glass. Idris rose shakily to his feet. The figure was gone, but the fissure remained, its edges glowing faintly with molten light. He could feel heat beneath it now, as though something beneath the earth still breathed. He turned toward the west and saw, upon a distant ridge, a gathering of villagers who had followed from afar. They stood motionless, staring at the spectacle. None spoke. The glass beneath their feet mirrored their forms, but cast no shadows. One of them stepped forward, eyes wide. "What have you seen, Idris?" The scholar opened his mouth, but no sound came. His voice felt lost somewhere between the worlds he had touched. The only words that formed within him were the ones he had heard in silence. What descends must be remembered. He looked once more upon the valley and felt the earth pulse beneath him, as if something vast and ancient stirred within its depths. Not sleeping, but waiting. A gust of wind swept through, sharp and sudden, scattering the stillness. Idris felt the feather within his satchel flare cold once more. The horizon dimmed, and the hum beneath the valley deepened to a tremor. It was not ending, it was beginning again. He closed his eyes as the first rumble of thunder rolled across the plains, not from the clouds, but from within the glass itself. The reflection of the sky flickered, and for a heartbeat, the heavens above and below seemed to merge into one. Idris whispered a prayer he barely understood, knowing that this valley was no longer of earth. It had become a mirror for the decree of the unseen, and Allah knows best. The valley no longer shone as it once had. By the next dawn, the brilliance had dimmed to a pale and uneasy stillness, as though the light itself had retreated beneath the surface of the earth. Yet its echo lingered in the air, a soft hum that never ceased, a memory that could not fade. Idris returned to the village carrying silence in his eyes, and though the people welcomed him, they looked upon him with quiet dread. For behind him, the horizon still glimmered faintly, and none could sleep without hearing the sound of wings in their dreams. Within days, signs began to unfold across the land. The wells, once deep and clear, turned dark and bitter. Crops wilted beneath a sun that refused to set properly, hovering too long at the edge of dusk, painting the world in perpetual twilight. The wind that came from the east was colder than mountain frost, and those who stood in it too long found their breath shallow, their voices trembling with words not their own. Fear rooted itself in every home, growing thicker than the dust. Idris spent his nights in prayer, though peace eluded him. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the valley's reflection, the vast imprint of wings, the fissure that glowed like a wound in creation. He felt it beneath his thoughts, calling, measuring his faith. The feather he carried was no longer cold. It burned faintly now, though its fire gave no warmth. Its light pulsed with strange rhythm, as if testing his heart's steadiness. He began to sense that what had descended was not done with him, nor with those who had witnessed the signs. The trial had begun, not of strength, but of belief. On the 7th night after his return, a storm rose from the desert. It came without clouds or thunder, only a furious wind laced with dust that glimmered like ash. The villagers gathered in the masjid, crying out for mercy. Idris led them in prayer, his voice steady though the walls shuddered around them. The storm howled for hours, then stopped as suddenly as it had come. When they stepped outside, the air was still, and every roof, every wall, every palm was covered in fine white powder that glowed faintly in the moonlight. A child touched it and cried out in pain, though no wound marked his skin. An elder recited verses over it, and the glow dimmed, retreating into the ground as if shamed. The people looked to Idris, their faces drawn and pale. "This is punishment," they said. "You have brought it upon us by seeking what was forbidden." He bowed his head, their fear cutting deeper than their words. "Nothing descends without the will of Allah," he said softly. "But not every trial is wrath. Some are remembrance." That night, he slept upon the masjid floor, his heart heavy with doubt. The feather lay beside him, silent and dull. In his dreams, he saw a vast plain of mirrors beneath a darkened sky. Upon it stood countless figures, some praying, some fleeing, some standing still in defiance. A voice echoed above them, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The heart that trembles in fear and the heart that trembles in awe are not the same. He awoke in tears, his chest tight with the weight of those words. By morning, word had spread that the neighboring city had suffered a strange calamity. Its fountains had turned to dust, and its gardens had withered overnight. The people there had declared the signs to be trickery, dismissing them as illusions of the desert. Now they fled toward Idris's village, seeking water and refuge. The streets filled with travelers, their faces gaunt and eyes hollow. Some carried relics they believed could protect them. Others carried nothing but fear. The air grew thick with despair, and even prayer felt strained beneath the weight of uncertainty. Idris walked among them silently. He could feel the balance of faith tipping, hope fading beneath fear's shadow. At the well, he saw a woman kneeling, whispering over a bowl of darkened water. Her tears fell into it, and for an instant the water cleared, glowing faintly. Idris watched in awe, realizing that belief itself had stirred the sign back to life. He knelt beside her, speaking gently. "Do not despair. Every test bears its mercy, though we may not see it." But even as he spoke, a murmur of unrest spread through the crowd. Some accused him of sorcery, others of leading them toward ruin. They demanded he destroy the feather, the token that marked him as witness. Idris held it before them. It no longer glowed, only shimmered faintly in the light. "This is not a weapon," he said. "It is a mirror. What it reveals depends on the heart that beholds it." But his words were swallowed by shouts, by the sound of fear dressed as anger. As the crowd pressed closer, a sudden tremor ran through the earth. The ground beneath their feet rippled like disturbed water. A voice, soft but immeasurable, passed through the valley, not in sound but in the movement of air itself. The people fell silent, their rage turning to dread. Idris stood motionless, his gaze fixed eastward. The horizon glowed again, this time brighter than before, as though the veil was thinning once more. He felt his heart quiver between terror and peace. The test was clear now. It was not the storm, nor the light, nor the silence. It was the measure of their hearts before the unseen. And as the wind rose once more, whispering through the dust, Idris whispered back, barely audible, "Strengthen us in patience. O Lord." The feather in his hand flickered faintly, its glow returning for a breath before fading into stillness. The storm did not come, but the silence that followed felt heavier than any thunder, and Allah knows best. The days following the storm were heavy with silence. The people spoke in whispers now, as though sound itself might provoke the unseen. Even the call to prayer echoed strangely through the air, bending against walls and vanishing before it reached the far hills. Idris walked among the weary, his steps measured, his eyes drawn again and again toward the east where the horizon glowed faintly each night, as if watching. His heart felt split between awe and dread. He had begun to understand that the signs did not arrive to punish, but to reveal the nature of those who witnessed them. And yet revelation itself could destroy as surely as flame. One evening, a boy came running from the southern edge of the village, shouting through his tears. His hands shone faintly as though dusted with silver. The people gathered around him, and through trembling lips he told them that the dry riverbed beyond the dunes was flowing again. At first none believed him. The drought had lasted years. No rain had fallen since the first whisper from the heavens. But when the elders went to see, they returned pale and speechless, their robes damp with light. The boy's words were true. The river had returned, yet it was not filled with water. Idris went to see for himself before dawn. The air grew cool as he neared the river's edge, and when the first light of morning touched it, the ground shimmered. Before him stretched a stream of living radiance, pure and silent, moving with the grace of water but glowing with its own inner fire. It flowed across the sand like a vein of the sky itself, casting reflections that wavered and trembled upon the dunes. The villagers followed behind, whispering prayers, weeping softly. None dared to approach too close. He knelt at the bank, watching how the luminous current twisted and breathed. It seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heart. The feather in his satchel began to hum faintly, a quiet echo of that same beat. Idris understood then that the light was not of the world's making. It was a continuation of the same descent, a fragment of what had touched the valley. Yet he could not discern whether it was mercy or warning. He dipped his hand toward it, stopping just short of its surface. The glow reached upward, meeting his reflection. For a brief moment he saw his own face dissolve into light before returning to shadow. Behind him, voices rose. The people were arguing. Some said this was a river of blessing, others a river of trial. A few claimed that whoever drank from it would be cured of all illness. Others whispered that it would steal the soul. One man, driven by desperation, stepped forward. Before anyone could stop him, he cupped his hands and drank deeply. The light folded around him like mist, and for a breath he seemed to shine from within. Then he went still. His eyes opened wide, reflecting only white. He did not fall nor cry out. He simply stopped moving, as if time itself had let go of him. The crowd recoiled in terror. The man's body remained upright, perfectly still, his skin faintly luminous. A wind swept through the river valley, scattering dust that glittered like frost. Idris rose, trembling, and approached him. There was no pulse, no warmth, yet the man's lips were curved in the faintest smile, as though he had seen something far beyond the world before departing it. Idris covered his face and whispered, "Forgive us, O Lord, for we know not which of your signs we witness." Panic spread quickly through the people. Some fled back toward the village, others knelt and prayed by the river's edge. Children cried, and the elders looked to Idris, desperate for instruction. He stood at the bank, silent, the glow of the river reflecting in his eyes. "No hand should touch what is not understood," he said quietly. "If it is mercy, it will not fade. If it is judgment, it will pass in its time. But we must not meet the unseen with haste." As dusk fell, the light grew stronger, casting the valley in a strange twilight where no shadows could form. Idris remained there through the night, listening to the hum that rose from beneath the surface. It was not random. It carried rhythm, like breath, like recitation. The verses he knew so well echoed faintly within his memory, aligning with the pulse of the river. And among his signs is that you see the earth still. But when we send down water upon it, it stirs and swells. The realization struck him like lightning. This was not water, but it was remembrance, an echo of divine mercy manifest in another form. Yet its purity was too vast for mortal hearts to endure without consequence. Idris bowed his head, his tears falling silently into the light, where they vanished without ripple or sound. As the night deepened, the glow began to recede, dimming gradually until only faint traces remained upon the sand. By dawn, the river was gone again, leaving behind a single, glassy scar across the desert floor. The man who had drunk from it still stood unmoving, untouched by decay. The villagers avoided the place thereafter, but Idris returned once more, alone, before sunrise. He stood upon the empty riverbed and felt the faint vibration still pulsing beneath his feet, like a hidden heart deep within the earth. The feather in his satchel trembled once, its coldness returning. Idris lifted his gaze to the horizon, and there he saw it again, the faint shimmer of light that had marked every descent before. He knew the next sign would not come quietly, and Allah knows best. The morning after the river of light vanished, the air hung thick with unease. The desert seemed to hold its breath. The villagers moved quietly, as if fearing to disturb what still lingered beneath the earth. Even the birds had fled the skies. Idris stood at the edge of the glassy scar where the river once flowed, the sun reflecting harshly against it. The man who had drunk from the luminous stream still stood upright in silence, untouched by decay, his features calm, his eyes open to a light only he could see. Idris watched him with reverent sorrow. The man had crossed into a truth no living heart could yet bear. That night Idris sat alone outside the village, where the dunes curved like waves around the valley. The feather in his satchel no longer glowed, but carried the faint scent of ash and rain, though no storm had touched the land. The dreams had grown stronger, visions of unseen forms gliding through clouds of gold and shadow, their wings vast, their silence heavier than thunder. They never spoke, but their presence pressed upon his soul until he woke trembling. He knew now that the signs were converging, and something, or someone, was drawing near. By the third night, a wind rose from the east. It was not the kind that carried sand or storm, but a slow, deliberate wind, as though each gust were measured. The people shuttered their homes, whispering prayers. Idris stood outside his door and listened. Beneath the rustle of the wind, there was rhythm, faint but certain, the same cadence he had heard in the river, the pulse of verses not yet revealed. The air carried dust that shimmered like silver powder, and through it, a shape emerged upon the horizon, a lone figure walking toward the village, each step scattering trails of faint light. Idris went to meet him. The figure moved with quiet grace, clothed in a robe the color of old parchment, the edges lined with dust. His face was shadowed beneath a hood, but his eyes glimmered like distant stars. When he reached Idris, he stopped, and the air grew still. The ground beneath them vibrated softly like the valley before the descent. The stranger's voice came calm and low, yet it carried the weight of thunder buried in silence. "You have seen what was meant for eyes that still question," he said. "Now you must listen to what is meant for hearts that still tremble." Idris bowed his head, unsure whether he faced man or messenger. "Who are you?" he asked. The stranger's lips curved faintly, not in smile but in acknowledgement. "I am a reminder," he said. "From the dust you came, and through it the message returns." He bent down, scooped a handful of sand, and let it fall between his fingers. As it touched the ground, it shimmered faintly, each grain glowing for a heartbeat before fading. "The signs that have unfolded," he continued, "are not of wrath nor mercy alone. They are of remembrance. The world forgets, so the heavens remind." The feather within Idris's satchel trembled, as though responding to the man's voice. "Why me?" Idris asked softly. "I am no prophet, no leader, only a seeker who stumbles through shadows." The stranger turned his gaze eastward. "It is not given to the great to witness first," he said. "It is given to the sincere. The proud see only what they desire. The humble see what they are shown." His eyes met Idris's, and for a moment, Idris saw within them the reflection of countless worlds, stars, valleys, oceans of light, and among them, the faint outline of wings spanning the heavens. The stranger stepped closer, his presence radiating quiet gravity. "The river that turned to light was a mirror," he said. "It revealed the hearts of those who drank. Some sought healing, some sought proof. Few sought remembrance. Only the pure were taken by it, not in death, but in unveiling." Idris felt the words pierce him, awakening both dread and peace. "Then where have they gone?" he asked. "To where all truth is gathered," came the reply. "But their names are still written in dust until the final call." A silence fell between them. The wind stirred again, soft and measured. Idris felt the sand beneath his feet shift slightly, forming faint patterns, lines curling into shapes like the scripts of an ancient language. The stranger glanced down, his expression unreadable. "The valley sleeps now," he said. "But when the gate opens, it will remember those who witnessed, and each heart will bear what it chose to see." Idris raised his eyes, the weight of destiny pressing upon him. "Is this the end?" The stranger's gaze softened. "Endings are only beginnings seen from below. The decree has not yet completed its circle. There is still one sign left, the gate that divides the winds." His voice grew distant, like echo fading across eternity. "When it opens, you will know that remembrance is complete." The air trembled once, and before Idris could speak again, the stranger began to fade, his form unraveling into motes of dust that shimmered in the moonlight. The wind caught them, carrying them eastward until nothing remained. Idris stood alone once more beneath the silent stars. He felt the feather in his satchel grow warm again, its light awakening softly like breath. The dunes around him shifted in slow waves, and in their movement he heard faint recitation, not from earth, nor from sky, but from the very dust itself. It was a verse of remembrance, carried by wind, echoing through time, a promise that what had descended had not left, but waited for hearts prepared to see. And Allah knows best. The night after the messenger of dust vanished, the desert did not sleep. A strange stillness blanketed the horizon, deep enough that even the stars seemed suspended in hesitation. Idris lay awake upon the cold ground, his thoughts circling like moths around the same light, the final sign the messenger had spoken of. The gate that divides the winds. The words echoed in his mind until dawn bled into the sky, pale and trembling. He rose, shoulders heavy with the weight of unseen command, and began walking eastward, where every sign had once been born. The journey led him beyond the familiar dunes into lands untouched by any footstep. The air grew thick, carrying neither scent nor sound. Each breath felt slower, each step heavier, as if the earth itself resisted his passage. By midday, he reached a high ridge overlooking the plain, and there the world below him shimmered. Dust rose in spirals that twisted into towering columns of light and shadow, swirling around a central emptiness, a vortex not of storm, but of silence. The winds did not howl. They whispered, circling something that could not yet be seen. Idris fell to his knees, awestruck. The feather in his satchel vibrated violently, then grew still. He knew this was it, the place where the unseen would cross once more into sight. The gate between winds. Yet it was not built of stone or flame or light, but of motion itself, an opening that appeared only when the winds divided, when the seen and unseen touched but did not merge. He stepped forward, feeling the currents shift around him, one warm as breath, the other cold as eternity. They spiraled in perfect balance, forming a threshold he could neither approach nor retreat from without trembling. He closed his eyes and recited softly, his voice breaking the stillness. "My Lord, show me the truth of this sign and guard my heart from its shadow." The air responded with a low hum, so deep it seemed to rise from the bones of the earth. The winds pulled apart, one rushing skyward, the other sinking low, and between them the air folded inward, revealing a vast expanse of luminous mist. Within that mist shimmered faint silhouettes, countless figures moving in perfect unity, their forms veiled by radiance. It was not light that illuminated them, but remembrance. A wave of air struck Idris, knocking him to one knee. The mist thickened, and a voice, deep and without language, resonated through him. "What is witnessed is never owned." The ground quaked beneath his palms, yet he did not flee. The mist parted, and for an instant he saw through the gate. What lay beyond was not another world, but the reflection of this one, perfect, silent, unbroken by sin or sorrow. The rivers of that realm glowed with pure light, its sky shimmered with unseen constellations, and its ground pulsed with the remembrance of every prostration ever made. Idris wept without understanding. The winds surged around him, carrying whispers that were neither command nor warning, but invitation. The gate called not for vision but for surrender, and as he gazed deeper into its endlessness, he saw movement, a single shadow crossing the brilliance. It moved with the grace of wings but bore no light, no radiance. The winds faltered, uncertain. Idris's heart clenched as the shadow passed across the mirrored ground of that other world. The gate shuddered, and a sound like the breath of the earth filled the air. He understood then that not all who descend carry mercy, and not all who rise bring peace. The balance of what he witnessed was shifting. The gate flickered, its mist turning from gold to silver, then to the color of storm clouds. The two winds collided, sending waves of sand into the air. Idris held his ground, his robe whipping violently, his voice rising in prayer. "O sustainer of all things, keep me firm as the truth unfolds." The winds roared, then fell silent. The gate blazed one final time, and within its light, Idris saw a vision, fleeting but eternal. A valley where all who had witnessed before him stood in stillness, faces lifted toward the heavens, their eyes reflecting the same light that had once split the sky. Above them, a voice recited, not in sound, but in remembrance, words that trembled through his soul. "We will show them our signs in the horizons and within themselves until it becomes clear to them that it is the truth." Then, as if the verse itself had closed the circle, the gate folded inward and vanished. The air fell heavy, the world returning to its fragile silence. Idris sank to the ground, breathing hard, his heart trembling between awe and sorrow. The feather in his satchel was gone, only fine dust remained, glittering faintly in the folds of the cloth. He gathered it in his hand and let it scatter into the wind. The currents carried it eastward, toward the place where the horizon still glowed faintly, as if remembering what had just been lost. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the dunes. Idris felt the earth quiet beneath him, as though the unseen had drawn back once more behind its veil. The winds had divided, and their meeting place was sealed again. He rose slowly, his steps uncertain but his heart steady. The gate had closed, but not forever. Somewhere in the silence he could still hear the faint hum of the divine decree, waiting for its final unveiling, and Allah knows best. The night after the gate vanished was unlike any Idris had ever known. The desert lay still as glass, and the stars above seemed to waver, their brilliance softened as though veiled by invisible hands. He could feel the air vibrating faintly beneath the calm, like breath drawn before an unseen command. The silence pressed upon him, not the stillness of peace, but of expectation. It was the quiet that came before something vast broke through the fabric of the world. He stood upon the ridge where the winds had divided, his eyes fixed upon the horizon that had never truly darkened since the descent began. All through the night he prayed. The words left his lips not as recitation, but as surrender. He no longer asked to understand, only to endure whatever truth was about to be revealed. The dust clung to his skin like ash, the taste of the storm still heavy in the air. Before dawn, the first sign came. The faint tremor beneath his feet, steady and deliberate, as though the earth's heart had begun to beat again. Then the wind rose, not from one direction, but from all, converging in perfect stillness above him. The stars bent, their light drawing into a single point at the center of the sky. Idris fell to his knees. A line of white fire split the heavens. It moved slowly at first, a wound opening between realms, pouring light into the world below. The ground shimmered, and every grain of sand reflected the brilliance, as if each one were a mirror to the divine. The villagers who had followed Idris to the valley cried out and fell prostrate, their voices trembling in fear and awe. Some wept, others could only whisper the remembrance of Allah through shaking lips. The light grew wider, brighter, until the sky itself seemed to fold outward, revealing a depth beyond vision, neither sun nor moon, but something uncreated. From that radiance, movement emerged. Not flame, not shadow, but forms vast and pure, their presence beyond measure. The air sang with soundless vibration, a harmony that filled every hollow place within the soul. Idris's heart pounded. He could not tell whether he trembled from fear or love. The beings descended without motion, their wings stretching across the horizon, their outlines shifting between light and the void it cast. One by one, they took their places upon the mirrored ground of the valley, and with their arrival, the trembling ceased. The world stood in absolute stillness, every sound swallowed in divine silence. The light dimmed, not from weakness, but from intention. It softened into a golden hue, warm and alive. Idris raised his head. Though no voice spoke, he understood. This was not the wrath of the unseen, but its unveiling. These were the witnesses of the decree, descending not to destroy but to remind. Yet among their radiance was one space empty, one shadow where light should have been. He remembered the hermit's warning, the missing star, the absence that would decide the balance. His gaze lingered upon that void, and unease stirred within him. A single figure stepped forward from the host, cloaked in white fire. Its wings folded inward as it approached the earth. Idris felt his breath vanish. The air itself seemed to kneel. The being turned its gaze upon him. No face, no eyes, only brilliance shaped into intent. It extended a hand, and in its palm glowed a feather identical to the one Idris had carried, though this one burned with perfect harmony, warm, steady, alive. Idris understood what was being shown. His trial had been the shadow of this light, a reflection of what mankind must bear to be reminded of the unseen. He bowed his head, tears falling freely. The being lowered the feather to the ground, and as it touched the sand, the valley bloomed with radiance. Every scar of glass turned to crystal, every grain of dust to light. The people gasped as the reflection of the heavens spread beneath their feet. The sky above and the earth below became mirrors of each other. Two realms joined in remembrance. And then, from the depths of that silence, a single sound emerged, a hum like a heartbeat that grew into resonance. Shaking the world, the horizon erupted in color, gold, blue, silver, waves of illumination rippling outward across the land. The people fell again in prostration, unable to bear the sight. Idris pressed his forehead into the glowing earth, whispering words that broke into sobs. "You have shown us what the eyes cannot hold." The warmth that surrounded him was neither fire nor wind, but presence, the nearness of something vast and merciful. Time itself seemed to pause. The sky above no longer held its distance. It had descended, become one with the world, if only for a moment. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the brilliance began to fade. The wings folded back into the heavens, the light receding like a tide. The valley dimmed, its crystal surface cooling into pale stone. The people lifted their heads, blinking into the silence that followed. Idris rose last, his face wet with tears. Above him the sky was whole again, though changed. It no longer shone as it once had, yet its stillness carried something eternal, as if the veil between the worlds had been thinned forever. He looked once more to where the feather had fallen. It lay upon the earth, no longer burning but soft and pure, its light steady as dawn. Idris lifted it gently, feeling warmth spread through his hands, not of heat, but of remembrance. He understood now. The signs were never to terrify, but to awaken. The descent was not of anger, but of mercy wrapped in awe. The world had been reminded of its origin, and through fear, it had remembered faith. The people gathered around him, eyes wide and hearts trembling. Idris looked to the sky, now quiet and whole, and whispered, "We have seen enough to know that belief does not come from sight." The wind rose once more, gentle this time, carrying away the last dust of brilliance from the valley, and Allah knows best. When the light withdrew and the sky sealed itself once more, a strange quiet descended upon the world, deeper than night, heavier than any storm. It was not the calm of peace, but of aftermath. The earth seemed to exhale, and in that breath, all creation trembled. The villagers who had witnessed the descent stood wordless, their faces streaked with tears and dust. No one spoke. Even the wind had forgotten its voice. Idris stood among them, the feather clasped in his hand, its warmth fading with each passing heartbeat. He felt as though the world itself had fallen into remembrance, a silence not born of fear, but of revelation too vast for speech. Days passed, yet the stillness endured. The valley lay transformed. Its once scorched surface now glimmered faintly beneath the sun, smooth as marble, cool to the touch. No birds crossed the sky above it, no footprints marked its edges. Those who ventured near returned pale and quiet, speaking of a soundless hum that pressed upon their hearts until they wept without knowing why. Idris remained at its center, sleeping little, praying often. The people brought him food and water, though he rarely ate. He was no longer sure where the boundary between the seen and unseen lay. Sometimes, as he bowed in prayer, he felt the ground pulse beneath his palms, as if the valley itself still remembered the footsteps of the descending hosts. On the 7th night after the sky's opening, a strange phenomenon spread across the land. From the mountains to the sea, voices vanished. Not lost through death or illness, but simply silenced. Mothers could not call their children. Merchants could not cry their wares. The adhan itself could not be heard, though the lips of the muezzins moved in perfect rhythm. The world had become mute. Idris looked upon the people's terror and understood. The reckoning had begun, not through destruction, but through stillness. It was as though Allah had commanded creation to listen. He climbed the highest dune overlooking the valley and raised his hands toward the heavens. No sound left his mouth, yet his heart thundered with supplication. The feather in his hand flared briefly, glowing with pale light, and then stilled. He felt its pulse fade completely, as though its purpose had been fulfilled. A great weight pressed upon him, neither fear nor despair, but responsibility. He turned toward the silent village below, the people watching him as though waiting for him to restore what had been taken. But Idris knew this was not his to command. The silence was the divine pause before understanding. That night, as the moon rose over the still land, Idris felt a faint vibration in the air, like the echo of a recitation half-remembered. The ground shimmered faintly, and within the valley he saw figures begin to take form, not of flesh, but of light and memory. They stood where the angels had once descended, their outlines soft and wavering. These were not the hosts returned, but reflections of those who had witnessed. Each figure faced the sky, unmoving, radiant in its silence. Idris understood. They were echoes of faith itself, preserved within the valley's heart. He stepped closer, his bare feet pressing softly against the cool, glassy ground. As he neared, one of the figures turned its head toward him, not in gesture but in presence. A wave of meaning struck his soul, wordless but unmistakable. The world has heard enough of its own voice. Now it must listen to the silence that speaks of its creator. Idris fell to his knees, tears spilling freely. For the first time, he felt peace within the stillness. When morning came, the silence broke. It did not shatter with sound, but with breath. The people awoke to the first whisper of wind moving through the palms, the faint rustle of leaves returning like mercy. Voices rose again, soft and hesitant, as though afraid to disturb what lingered. The adhan was called, its echo clear and pure. The people wept as the familiar sound returned to their ears. But Idris knew it was not the same world that had once spoken. It was a world that had listened. He descended from the dune, his steps slow and deliberate. The villagers gathered around him, their faces filled with both relief and reverence. The silence, one whispered. What did it mean? Idris looked toward the horizon, where dawn spread its first light across the valley. It was not punishment, he said softly. It was remembrance. The world was told to listen, and in listening it was forgiven. The people bowed their heads, and for a time, no one spoke again. The sound of the wind passing through the valley was enough, a prayer in motion, a hymn without words. Idris lifted the feather once more, now cold and weightless, and placed it upon the ground where the angels had once stood. It shimmered faintly, then dissolved into dust that caught the morning light. The valley glowed one final time, its surface reflecting the sky in perfect stillness. As the sun climbed higher, Idris turned away. The silence had passed, but its memory would remain, a reminder that even in the absence of sound, the truth of creation speaks continuously to the hearts that are willing to hear, and Allah knows best. Years passed, yet the memory of that day lingered like a scent that never faded. The Valley of Glass had become a place of silence and prayer, a mark of what the heavens had revealed and withdrawn. No one built upon it, no one tilled its soil. The people called it the mirror of the sky. For when the moon rose above its surface, it reflected not just light, but something alive within the reflection, something that seemed to remember. Idris had grown older, his beard white as the dunes, his eyes gentle with the calm of one who had seen enough to stop asking. The world around him had changed. Kingdoms rose and fell, new generations were born, but the valley remained untouched, its hum faint, its glow eternal beneath the dust of time. Every year, Idris would return to the valley at dawn. He would walk its silent expanse barefoot, the coolness of its surface steady beneath his feet. There were no signs left of the feather, no trace of what had once descended, yet the peace that radiated there was unmistakable. He would kneel in the center, facing the east, where the first light of morning crept across the desert, and whisper prayers that had no sound, only intent. It was during one such morning that he noticed something new, a faint glimmer beneath the glass, subtle and pulsing, like a heartbeat long forgotten. He leaned close, pressing his palm against the surface. The hum that had once filled the valley was stronger now, steady, rhythmic. Beneath the translucent layer, faint patterns began to emerge, lines that curved and intersected, forming shapes like script, though no language he knew. They glowed softly, threads of gold weaving through the glass, tracing the memory of every prostration, every tear shed in remembrance. Idris felt warmth rise through his hand, spreading to his chest, filling him with a calm that was neither of this world nor bound by it. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, and in that breath he felt the world move again. The air shifted. The wind rose suddenly, sweeping through the valley in gentle spirals. Sand danced across the surface, forming waves of light that shimmered like water. Idris opened his eyes, and the valley was no longer still. From its depths came a faint glow that spread outward, chasing the horizon. The desert beyond began to change. Plants long dead pushed through the sand, their leaves glinting with dew though no rain had fallen. Streams emerged from dry gullies, flowing quietly, and the air filled with the scent of life returning. It was as if the world itself had exhaled a prayer it had been holding for centuries. Idris fell into sujud, his forehead pressing against the glass. No words came, only tears. He understood now. The silence had been a seed, and what descended had not left. It had merely gone deep into the world, waiting for the hearts of men to remember before it could rise again. The earth had not been forsaken. It had been sanctified by patience. The return to light was not the coming of something new, but the awakening of what had always been beneath the dust. As he lifted his head, the horizon blazed. The sun had risen fully now, but its light was different, soft yet immeasurable, as though it had been filtered through mercy itself. The villagers who had gathered at a distance fell to their knees, weeping. The once quiet valley now shimmered with movement. The reflection upon its surface was no longer just the sky, but the remembrance of everything it had witnessed, the angels, the descent, the trials, the silence, and the prayers that bridged them all. Idris turned to the people and spoke softly, his voice carrying across the dunes with unexpected strength. "The world has not changed," he said. "It has remembered. The signs were never to show power, but to awaken gratitude. The silence was mercy, and this light is the answer to every patient heart." His words sank into the stillness, and one by one the people bowed, their tears falling upon the glass until the valley shimmered with their reflection. The old scholar remained there long after the others left, the light of dawn washing over him. The hum beneath the ground grew softer, like a heartbeat slowing to rest. He smiled faintly, his gaze fixed on the sky that once opened and would open again in its time. The wind rose once more, warm and steady, circling him as though carrying unseen wings. He whispered his final remembrance, a quiet surrender that faded into the desert breeze. By the time the sun reached its height, the valley was empty. Only the gentle shimmer of light remained upon its surface, like the echo of a verse recited in perfect devotion. And for generations after, travelers who passed that place would speak of the feeling that overcame them there, of peace too deep to describe, of wind that whispered prayers they did not know, of a silence that taught more than sound ever could. And when night fell, the valley glowed faintly beneath the stars, as if it still remembered the moment heaven touched the earth. And the heart of the world learned to listen again, and Allah knows best.